training grounds like a shroud of doubt, and Lieutenant Sarah Chen could feel every pair of eyes boring into her back as she laced up her combat boots. The whispers had followed her from the moment she'd stepped foot on Camp Pendleton 3 weeks ago, a chorus of skepticism that seemed to echo with every footstep on the concrete barracks floor. "She's too small," they said. "Too soft. What's a computer science graduate doing here anyway?" The voices belonged to faces she'd grown accustomed to seeing in the mess hall, in the briefing rooms, and most intimidatingly, in the training pit, where she was about to face her greatest challenge yet. At 5'4" and barely weighing 120 pounds soaking wet, Sarah knew she didn't fit the traditional image of a Marine. Her delicate features and quick smile had earned her the nickname Pixie among some of the more condescending recruits, though they were careful never to say it to her face. What they didn't know was that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a will forged in the fires of a childhood spent proving herself in a world that consistently underestimated her. Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in a military family, she'd learned early that respect wasn't given. It was earned, one grueling challenge at a time. Her father, Colonel James Chen, had been a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd instilled in her the belief that true strength came not from the size of your muscles, but from the size of your heart and the sharpness of your mind. Her 3 older brothers had all followed in his footsteps, each earning their place in different branches of the military through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. Sarah, however, had initially chosen a different path, pursuing her passion for technology and earning a master's degree in cybersecurity from MIT. She'd spent 2 years working for a prestigious tech firm, designing security protocols for military contractors, but something had always felt missing. The call to serve, to test herself in the same crucible that had shaped her family, had grown stronger with each passing day. The decision to enlist had shocked everyone, including herself. Her comfortable 6-figure salary, her corner office, with a view of the Boston skyline, her promising career trajectory, all of it had felt increasingly hollow compared to the legacy of service that ran through her veins like an inherited melody. Her brothers had been supportive but concerned, knowing that the physical demands of Marine training were unlike anything she'd ever faced. Her mother had wept, not from pride or disappointment, but from a deep maternal fear that her youngest child was walking into a world designed to break people who looked exactly like her daughter. Now, standing on the edge of the combat training area, Sarah could feel the weight of all those expectations and doubts pressing down on her shoulders, like a lead blanket. The 5 Marines she was about to face were not just any random selection of trainees. They were the elite of her class, the ones who'd dominated every physical challenge since basic training began. There was Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, a former college linebacker whose biceps were the size of Sarah's thighs. Jake "Bulldog" Morrison, a firefighter from Detroit whose grip could crush walnuts. Tommy "Lightning" Park, a track star who could run a 6-minute mile even after a full day of drills. David "Fortress" Williams, a construction worker whose massive frame cast shadows like a walking building. And finally, Alex "Viper" Thompson, the unit's unofficial leader, whose cold, calculating stare had intimidated more than one recruit into requesting a transfer. The challenge had been issued 3 days ago during what was supposed to be a routine team-building exercise. Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes, a 20-year veteran whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for weakness, had been observing the training rotations when she'd overheard a particularly cruel conversation between some of the male recruits. They'd been discussing whether Sarah belonged in combat training at all, with Thompson leading the charge in questioning her physical capabilities and suggesting she'd be better suited for administrative duties. The conversation had grown increasingly personal, with references to her academic background and implications that she was only there because of some perceived quota system. What the men hadn't realized was that Sarah had been within earshot, her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and rage as their words cut deeper than any physical wound. She'd spent countless hours in the gym before enlisting, working with personal trainers and pushing her body to limits she'd never thought possible. Her mile time had dropped from 12 minutes to 7. Her push-up count had increased from barely 10 to an impressive 45. She could carry a 60-pound pack for miles without complaint and had scored in the top 10% on every written exam. Yet none of that seemed to matter to the 5 men who had appointed themselves as the arbiters of her worthiness. Sergeant Major Hayes had made a decision that surprised everyone, including Sarah. Rather than discipline the men for their unprofessional conduct, she'd announced a special training exercise that would settle the question once and for all. Sarah would face all 5 men in a series of combat scenarios designed to test not just physical strength, but tactical thinking, endurance, and mental toughness. The challenges would be varied and unpredictable, ranging from hand-to-hand combat, simulations to strategic problem-solving under pressure. Most importantly, the exercise would be observed by the entire training company, turning what could have been a private humiliation into a very public trial by fire. The night before the challenge, Sarah had barely slept. She'd spent hours reviewing combat techniques, running through scenarios in her mind, and trying to calm the storm of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. Her roommate, Private Lisa Wu, had tried to offer comfort and encouragement, but the words felt hollow against the magnitude of what lay ahead. Sarah knew that this wasn't just about proving herself to 5 arrogant men. It was about proving to herself that she belonged in this world, that her decision to leave her comfortable life behind had been the right one. As dawn broke over the training facility, Sarah had made her way to the small chapel on base, not because she was particularly religious, but because she needed a moment of quiet to center herself. She'd sat in the empty pews, surrounded by memorial plaques honoring Marines who had given their lives in service to their country, and felt a profound connection to something larger than herself. These men and women had faced far greater challenges than a training exercise with 5 skeptical recruits. They had stared down enemy fire, carried wounded comrades to safety, and made the ultimate sacrifice for their beliefs. Compared to their struggles, her current challenge seemed almost trivial, yet she knew that for her, in this moment, it was everything. The training area had been transformed overnight into a complex obstacle course that would test every aspect of military readiness. There were walls to climb, ropes to traverse, simulated combat scenarios, and strategic challenges that would require quick thinking under pressure. A crowd of nearly 200 Marines had gathered to witness the spectacle, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, genuine concern for Sarah's well-being. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, like the moment before a heavyweight boxing match where everyone knows they're about to witness something extraordinary. Sergeant Major Hayes stood in the center of the training area, her crisp uniform and steely expression commanding absolute attention from everyone present. She'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had seen combat in ways that most of the recruits could only imagine, and her presence alone was enough to silence even the most boisterous members of the crowd. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned every stripe on her sleeve through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to excellence. Today's exercise is about more than physical capability, she announced, her words carrying across the silent training ground. Like a battle cry, it's about heart, determination, and the warrior spirit that defines every true Marine. Some of you have questioned whether Lieutenant Chen belongs here. Today, she'll provide the answer. Her eyes found Sarah in the crowd, and for just a moment, there was something that might have been encouragement flickering behind her professional demeanor. The rules are simple. 5 separate challenges, each designed to test different aspects of combat readiness. Lieutenant Chen will face each of these Marines individually, and the results will speak for themselves. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The morning sun was beginning to burn away the mist, casting long shadows across the training ground and illuminating the faces of her competitors. Tank. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles and grinned, apparently relishing the opportunity to demonstrate his physical superiority. Bulldog Morrison was stretching his massive shoulders, his firefighter's training evident in the way he prepared his body for the challenges ahead. Lightning Park was already bouncing on his toes, his track star reflexes clearly itching for the chance to showcase his speed and agility. Fortress Williams stood like a mountain, his construction-hardened hands capable of crushing concrete, while Viper Thompson's cold stare seemed to penetrate directly into Sarah's soul, as if he were already savoring his anticipated victory. But as Sarah looked at each of her opponents, something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of calm washing over her. All the doubt, all the anxiety, all the crushing weight of expectations seemed to evaporate like morning dew under the rising sun. She thought of her father, of the countless stories he'd told her about Marines who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious not because they were the biggest or strongest, but because they refused to surrender. She thought of her brothers, each of whom had faced their own moments of truth and emerged stronger for the experience. Most of all, she thought of herself, not the uncertain woman who had walked onto this base 3 weeks ago, but the warrior she was becoming with each passing day of training. The first challenge was about to begin, and Lieutenant Sarah Chen was ready to show the world exactly what she was made of. Challenge 1: Tactical Combat Simulation. Sergeant Major Hayes announced, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Hand-to-hand combat scenario. No weapons, no protective gear beyond standard training equipment. First opponent, Rodriguez. She gestured toward Tank, whose massive frame seemed to expand even further as he stepped into the designated combat circle. This isn't about brute strength, Hayes continued, though her eyes never left Sarah's face. It's about tactical thinking, adaptability, and the ability to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah entered the circle, and immediately the crowd's murmur grew louder. Standing next to Tank Rodriguez was like standing next to a small building. At 6'3" and weighing nearly 240 pounds of solid muscle, he had at least 120 pounds on her. His college football background was evident in every movement, the way he shifted his weight, the predatory crouch he assumed, the calculating look in his eyes as he sized up his much smaller opponent. The smart money was on Tank ending this in under 30 seconds, and Sarah could hear whispered bets being placed in the crowd behind her. What the spectators didn't know, however, was that Sarah had spent the last 6 months before enlisting studying more than just cybersecurity protocols. Her oldest brother, Captain Michael Chen, was a hand-to-hand combat instructor at Quantico, and during her brief visits home, he'd begun teaching her something that would prove invaluable in moments like this. Size and strength matter, he'd told her during one of their training sessions in her parents' garage, but they also create predictable patterns. Big guys fight like big guys. They expect their opponents to fight like small people. When you don't, it creates an advantage that most fighters never see coming. The whistle blew, and Tank immediately charged forward with the subtlety of a freight train. His strategy was simple and effective against most opponents. Use his size and reach to overwhelm his target before they could establish any kind of defensive position. His massive hands reached out to grab Sarah in what would have been a devastating, bear hug, but she wasn't there anymore. In a move that seemed to defy physics, she had dropped low and pivoted to his left, using his own momentum against him. As he stumbled past her, trying to stop his forward progress, Sarah's leg swept behind his ankle in a perfectly executed trip that sent all 240 pounds of Tank Rodriguez crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact that seemed to shake the entire training area. The crowd fell silent. This wasn't what anyone had expected to see. Tank rolled quickly to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing anger. He'd been making tackles against college linebackers for 4 years. Getting taken down by someone who looked like she could be blown away by a strong wind was both humiliating and incomprehensible. He circled more carefully now, his respect for his opponent grudgingly increasing even as his determination to prove his superiority intensified. Sarah remained calm, her breathing steady and controlled. She'd learned from her brother that the first successful technique in any fight was often the most important. not because it caused significant damage, but because it changed the psychological dynamic. Tank was no longer fighting someone he saw as weak. He was fighting someone who had already proven she could hurt him. That shift in perception would make him more cautious, more defensive, and ultimately more predictable. The second engagement lasted longer. Tank had learned from his mistake and was using his reach advantage more effectively, throwing straight punches that forced Sarah to stay at a distance. For nearly 2 minutes they danced around each other, Tank probing for openings, while Sarah waited for the right moment to exploit his inevitably declining stamina. Carrying that much muscle required enormous amounts of energy, and the California sun was beginning to heat up the training ground in a way that favored smaller, more efficient fighters. Sarah's opportunity came when Tank, growing frustrated with his inability to connect with any significant strikes, committed to a powerful right cross that would have ended the fight instantly if it had landed. Instead, Sarah ducked under the punch and stepped inside his guard, her elbow striking upward toward his solar plexus with surgical precision. The blow landed perfectly, driving the air from Tank's lungs and causing him to double over in pain. Before he could recover, Sarah had grabbed his wrist and executed a textbook arm drag that sent him spinning off balance and crashing to the ground for the second time. This time, Tank was slower to get up. The combination of physical exhaustion and psychological defeat was written across his face like a roadmap of his expectations crumbling in real time. The crowd, which had been expecting to witness Sarah's quick defeat, was now completely silent, trying to process what they were seeing. Sergeant Major Hayes called the match after Tank failed to answer a standing 8 count. His pride wounded more severely than his body, but his respect for his opponent now absolute and undeniable. Challenge 2. Endurance run with tactical obstacles, Hayes announced without missing a beat. 3 miles, full combat load, through the advanced obstacle course. Chen versus Morrison. Bulldog Morrison stepped forward, his firefighter's training evident in the confident way he approached what was clearly his element. Running into burning buildings while carrying heavy equipment was literally his profession. A 3-mile obstacle run should have been little more than a warm-up exercise for someone of his conditioning and experience. But as they lined up at the starting line, Sarah felt a strange sense of confidence that surprised even her. During her months of preparation, she discovered something about herself that she'd never known during her academic career. She was built for endurance. Her smaller frame required less energy to move efficiently. Her cardiovascular system had adapted quickly to intense training, and most importantly, her mental discipline, honed through years of solving complex technical problems under pressure, translated perfectly to the kind of sustained effort required for long-distance challenges. The starting gun fired, and Bulldog immediately took the lead, his powerful legs eating up ground with mechanical efficiency. The course ahead of them was a brutal combination of natural terrain and man-made obstacles. Rope climbs, wall traversals, crawling sections through simulated combat zones, and water crossings that would test both physical stamina and mental fortitude. The crowd followed along the perimeter, their earlier skepticism now replaced with genuine curiosity about how this unprecedented challenge would unfold. For the first mile, Bulldog maintained his lead, his professional conditioning, allowing him to navigate the obstacles with practiced ease. Sarah followed closely behind, her breathing controlled and her movements economical. She wasn't trying to match his pace. Instead, she was running her own race, conserving energy for the later stages when his superior strength would begin to work against him. Her brother David, a marathon runner who'd competed in the Boston Marathon 3 times, had taught her that endurance events were won in the final miles, when preparation and mental toughness mattered more than raw physical ability. The turning point came during the second mile, at a particularly challenging section that required climbers to traverse a 40-foot rope bridge while carrying a 40-pound pack. Bulldog's powerful build, which had been an advantage on flat ground and during climbing sections, now became a liability. The rope bridge swayed dangerously under his weight, and his larger frame made it difficult to maintain balance while moving quickly across the unstable surface. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to float across the bridge, her lighter weight and lower center of gravity allowing her to maintain speed while using minimal energy to stay balanced. By the halfway point of the second mile, they were running neck and neck. Bulldog's breathing had become labored, and sweat was pouring down his face despite the relatively cool morning air. Sarah, in contrast, looked like she could maintain her current pace indefinitely. Her academic background had taught her to break complex problems into manageable components, and she was applying that same analytical approach to the physical challenge. Each obstacle was simply another problem to be solved efficiently. Each mile was just another variable in an equation that she was steadily optimizing in her favor. The third mile revealed the true difference between professional conditioning and strategic preparation. Bulldog, despite his impressive fitness level, had trained for the explosive bursts of energy required in firefighting. Sarah had trained specifically for this type of sustained effort, and the difference was becoming increasingly apparent with each passing minute. As they approached the final series of obstacles, a combination wall climb, rope descent, and sprint finish, Sarah made her move. Instead of trying to match Bulldog's power-based approach to the wall climb, she used technique and momentum to scale the 15-foot barrier with fluid efficiency. At the top, she paused just long enough to see Bulldog struggling with the rope descent, his grip weakened by fatigue and his technique compromised by exhaustion. Sarah's descent was controlled and swift, and by the time her boots hit the ground, she had opened up a lead that would prove insurmountable. The final sprint to the finish line was less a race than a victory lap. Sarah crossed the line with energy to spare, while Bulldog staggered across nearly 30 seconds later, his respect for his opponent now matching Tank's grudging admiration. The crowd's reaction was no longer polite surprise. It was genuine awe at what they were witnessing. But it was during the brief rest period between challenges that Sarah noticed something that would change everything about what was happening. Sergeant Major Hayes was not just observing the competition. She was taking detailed notes, speaking quietly into a radio, and occasionally glancing at a group of officers who had appeared at the edge of the training area. These weren't regular base personnel. Their uniforms, their bearing, and their obvious authority suggested something far more significant than a routine training exercise. As Sarah toweled off and prepared for the third challenge, she caught a fragment of conversation between Hayes and one of the mysterious officers. Preliminary. Assessment confirms. Exceptional tactical thinking combined with recommend immediate consideration for. The words were too quiet to make out completely, but the implications sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't just about proving herself to 5 skeptical Marines anymore. Something else was happening. Here, something that would transform what she'd thought was a simple training exercise into something far more consequential than she could have ever imagined. Challenge 3. Tactical problem solving under extreme pressure, Sergeant Major Hayes announced, but this time her voice carried a different quality, one that Sarah was beginning to recognize as barely contained excitement. Chen versus Park. Lightning, you're up. Tommy Park stepped forward, his trackstar confidence still intact despite having witnessed his 2 teammates' unexpected defeats. As a former college sprinter who'd nearly qualified for the Olympics, he possessed the kind of explosive speed that made him formidable in any scenario requiring quick reactions and rapid movement. But this challenge was different from the previous 2. Instead of a straightforward physical contest, Hayes led them to a complex mock-up that resembled an urban warfare training facility. The structure was a maze of interconnected rooms, corridors, and obstacles designed to simulate the chaos of real combat situations. The scenario is simple, Hayes explained, though her definition of simple seemed increasingly suspect. Terrorist cell has taken hostages in a building. Your mission is to neutralize the threats and extract the civilians without casualties. You'll be working separately, and your performance will be evaluated on speed, accuracy, and tactical decision-making. What made this challenge particularly interesting was that it played directly into Sarah's strengths in a way that the previous physical contests hadn't fully revealed. Her academic background wasn't just in generic computer science. She'd specialized in systems analysis and strategic problem-solving for military applications. During her time at MIT, she'd worked on projects involving battlefield logistics, resource optimization under pressure, and tactical decision-making algorithms. In essence, she'd spent years training her mind to solve exactly the types of problems that this challenge presented. Lightning Park entered the facility first, his natural athleticism immediately apparent as he moved through the corridors with impressive speed. His approach was direct and efficient. Identify threats, neutralize them quickly, move to the next objective. The crowd, watching through closed-circuit monitors, could see him clearing rooms with textbook precision. His reflexes, allowing him to react to pop-up targets faster than most trained soldiers. His time through the course was exceptional, just under 4 minutes with minimal tactical errors. When it was Sarah's turn, however, something remarkable happened. Instead of simply trying to match Park's speed, she spent nearly 30 seconds at the entrance, studying the facility layout and analyzing the tactical situation. The crowd began to murmur impatiently, assuming she was hesitating out of fear or uncertainty. But what they didn't realize was that Sarah's mind was working like an advanced tactical computer, processing variables and calculating optimal approaches, with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to cybersecurity protocols. Her movement through the facility was completely different from Park's approach. Where he had relied on speed and reflexes, Sarah employed systematic analysis and strategic thinking. She identified patterns in the target placement that revealed optimal routes, discovered tactical shortcuts that Park had missed entirely, and, most impressively, found ways to neutralize multiple threats simultaneously through careful positioning and timing. Her path through the maze was less direct but far more efficient, and when she completed the course, her time was nearly 40 seconds faster than Park's, a margin that left even the experienced instructors stunned. But the real revelation came when the tactical analysis was reviewed. Park's approach, while impressive in its execution, had followed predictable patterns that would have been easily countered by adaptive opponents. Sarah's strategy, however, demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that impressed even the mysterious officers who were observing from the sidelines. She had approached the challenge not as a physical test, but as a complex problem requiring creative solutions, and her performance suggested capabilities that extended far beyond basic combat training. Challenge 4: Psychological Resilience and Leadership Under Crisis, Hayes announced, and now Sarah was certain that something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't a standard training exercise. The challenges were becoming increasingly specialized, testing specific capabilities that seemed almost tailor-made to evaluate her unique skill set. Chen versus Williams. Fortress, center stage. David, Fortress. Williams was a mountain of a man whose construction background had given him not just incredible physical strength, but also the kind of mental toughness required to work in dangerous conditions while maintaining absolute focus on complex tasks. This challenge, however, was designed to test something entirely different: the ability to function effectively while under extreme psychological pressure and to lead others through crisis situations. The scenario was elaborate and unsettling. Sarah and Williams were placed in separate but identical simulation chambers designed to replicate the stress of combat situations. Each chamber was equipped with multiple screens showing chaotic battlefield footage, speakers blasting realistic combat audio, and environmental systems that created disorienting sensory experiences including strobe lighting, smoke effects, and sudden temperature changes. Their task was to analyze incoming intelligence reports, make tactical decisions, and coordinate simulated troop movements, all while being subjected to increasingly intense psychological stressors. What made this challenge particularly revealing was that it tested the kind of mental resilience that couldn't be developed through physical training alone. Williams, despite his impressive composure under normal circumstances, began to show signs of stress within minutes. The sensory overload and psychological pressure clearly affected his decision-making, causing him to make increasingly defensive choices and lose track of the broader tactical picture. Sarah, however, seemed to thrive in the chaos. Her academic training had prepared her for exactly this type of multivariable problem-solving under pressure. More importantly, her months of preparation for Marine training had included extensive work on stress management and mental conditioning. She'd studied meditation techniques, practiced tactical breathing exercises, and most crucially, learned to compartmentalize her thinking in ways that allowed her to function effectively even when surrounded by overwhelming stimuli. As the challenge progressed, the differences between their approaches became increasingly apparent. Williams was fighting the stress, trying to push through it using sheer willpower and determination. Sarah was managing it, using the mental tools she'd developed to maintain clarity and focus regardless of the external chaos. Her tactical decisions remained sharp and adaptive, while Williams' choices became increasingly rigid and reactive. But the most impressive aspect of Sarah's performance came during the leadership portion of the challenge. When presented with scenarios requiring her to coordinate multiple units while dealing with casualties, equipment failures, and rapidly changing battlefield conditions, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of crisis leadership that surprised even herself. She found herself naturally prioritizing tasks, communicating clearly under pressure, and maintaining morale, even while delivering difficult news about simulated casualties and tactical setbacks. The observers were taking extensive notes now, and Sarah could see animated discussions taking place among the mysterious officers. Whatever they were evaluating, her performance was clearly exceeding their expectations in ways that went far beyond simple physical capability or even tactical competence. When the challenge ended, Williams emerged from his chamber looking exhausted and somewhat defeated. The psychological pressure had taken a visible toll, and his usual confident demeanor was noticeably shaken. Sarah, in contrast, seemed energized by the experience. The complex problem-solving and leadership challenges had engaged parts of her, intellect that pure physical training couldn't reach, and she felt more confident than at any point since the challenges had begun. "Final challenge," Hayes announced, her voice now carrying unmistakable pride and anticipation. "Chen versus Thompson. Viper, this is your show." "Alex, Viper." Thompson stepped forward, his cold stare now mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. He'd watched his 4 teammates fall to opponents they'd collectively dismissed as inferior, and he was beginning to understand that everything they'd assumed about Sarah Chen had been catastrophically wrong. But Thompson was different from the others. Where Tank had relied on brute strength, Morrison on conditioning, Park on speed, and Williams on mental toughness, Thompson's reputation was built on something far more dangerous. Pure tactical intelligence combined with an almost predatory understanding of human psychology. He'd earned his nickname not through physical dominance, but through an uncanny ability to identify and exploit his opponent's weaknesses with surgical precision. As they prepared for the final challenge, Sarah realized that this confrontation would be different from all the others. Thompson wasn't just trying to defeat her, he was studying her, analyzing her previous performances, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities that he could use to finally prove that her earlier victories had been flukes rather than indicators of genuine capability. What neither of them knew was that this final challenge would reveal not just the extent of Sarah's abilities, but also the true purpose behind the entire exercise. The mysterious officers weren't just observing a training competition. They were conducting the final evaluation for a classified program that would change Sarah's life forever, assuming she could survive what Alex Thompson was about to unleash against her. Final challenge: comprehensive tactical warfare simulation, Sergeant Major Hayes announced, her voice now carrying the weight of something far more significant than a simple training exercise. This scenario will test everything: combat skills, tactical thinking, leadership capability, adaptability, and psychological resilience. The situation: you are commanding separate Marine units in a classified hostage rescue operation. Real-time intelligence, multiple variables, and consequences for every decision. As Hayes spoke, the training area underwent a dramatic transformation. What had been a simple exercise ground was now revealed to be something far more sophisticated. A multi-level tactical simulation facility that rose from hidden underground positions like something from a science fiction movie. The structure was enormous, with multiple floors, interconnected chambers, and what appeared to be some of the most advanced military simulation technology Sarah had ever seen. This wasn't standard Marine Corps training equipment. This was the kind of cutting-edge facility that suggested involvement from much higher levels of military command. Thompson's eyes narrowed as he took in the sophisticated setup, his tactical mind already working to process the implications of what they were facing. Unlike the previous challenges, this wasn't just about individual performance. It was about command capability under the most realistic and stressful conditions possible. Both competitors would be leading simulated units through a complex rescue operation, with their decisions affecting not just their own success, but the virtual lives of hostages and Marines under their command. The briefing that followed was unlike anything from standard training. Instead of simplified scenarios, they were presented with a realistic intelligence package involving a terrorist cell that had taken American civilians hostage in a compound that was an exact replica of known enemy strongholds in active conflict zones. The mission parameters were complex: minimize casualties, extract high-value intelligence, neutralize threats, and coordinate with multiple support units including air assets, intelligence teams, and medical personnel. What made this challenge particularly intense was that both Sarah and Thompson would be working simultaneously in parallel scenarios, with their performance being directly compared in real time. They could see each other's tactical displays, monitor each other's decision-making processes, and watch as their different approaches played out under identical conditions. It was psychological warfare combined with tactical evaluation, designed to test not just their individual capabilities, but their ability to function under the additional pressure of direct competition. Thompson entered his command center with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for exactly this type of challenge his entire military career. His approach was methodical and aggressive, utilizing overwhelming force and direct assault tactics that reflected classic Marine Corps doctrine. He deployed his simulated units with precision, established clear command hierarchies, and began executing a textbook assault plan that prioritized speed and decisive action over subtlety and finesse. Sarah's approach, however, was radically different. Instead of immediately beginning the assault, she spent precious minutes analyzing the intelligence package with the same systematic thoroughness she'd once applied to cybersecurity vulnerabilities. She identified patterns in the enemy's defensive positioning that suggested potential weaknesses, analyzed the hostage locations to determine optimal extraction routes, and, most importantly, began to develop a comprehensive strategy that accounted for variables that Thompson's more conventional approach had overlooked. The differences in their command styles became immediately apparent. Thompson was issuing rapid-fire orders with military precision, his units moving with mechanical efficiency toward their objectives. His tactical display showed impressive coordination and timing, with each element of his force performing exactly as doctrine dictated. To most observers, his approach looked like the work of a seasoned combat commander who understood exactly how to execute a complex military operation. Sarah's command style was more collaborative and adaptive. Instead of simply issuing orders, she was actively communicating with her simulated unit leaders, gathering real-time intelligence updates, and adjusting her strategy based on developing tactical situations. Her approach was more fluid, more responsive to changing conditions, and more focused on minimizing casualties than on achieving rapid tactical objectives. To traditionalists, her style might have seemed hesitant or overly cautious, but to the officers observing from the sidelines, it was beginning to look like something extraordinary. The first major divergence came when both commanders encountered unexpected resistance at their primary assault points. Thompson's response was to increase firepower and push through the opposition using superior force and determination. His simulated casualties began mounting, but his units were making steady progress toward their objectives. It was a classic, the example of Marine Corps philosophy. When you encounter the enemy, you attack with everything you have and accept the costs necessary to achieve victory. Sarah's response revealed the full extent of her tactical sophistication. Instead of escalating the confrontation, she recognized that the unexpected resistance was actually providing valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and positioning. She ordered a tactical withdrawal that confused many observers but allowed her to reposition her forces for a multi-pronged assault that exploited weaknesses she'd identified during the initial contact. Her approach required more time and coordination, but when she finally executed her revised strategy, the results were devastating to the simulated enemy and virtually bloodless for her own forces. The psychological pressure intensified as the simulation progressed. Both commanders were dealing with simulated casualties, equipment failures, communication breakdowns, and rapidly changing intelligence updates. But while Thompson was fighting the chaos, trying to maintain control through force of will and rigid adherence to established procedures, Sarah was dancing with it, adapting her strategy in real time and finding opportunities in situations that would have overwhelmed less flexible commanders. The turning point came during the hostage extraction phase. Thompson's forces had successfully breached the compound and were beginning to secure the hostages, but his aggressive approach had resulted in significant collateral damage and multiple civilian casualties. His tactical objectives were being achieved, but at costs that would be unacceptable in real-world operations. Sarah's forces, meanwhile, had taken longer to reach the extraction point, but when they arrived, they did so with perfect intelligence about enemy positions, optimal extraction routes, and medical support already positioned to handle casualties. What happened next would be talked about in Marine training circles for years to come. As Thompson's simulation showed him achieving tactical success while dealing with mounting casualties and complications, Sarah's display revealed something that seemed almost impossible: a flawless execution of one of the most complex military operations any of the observers had ever witnessed. Every hostage extracted safely, every enemy combatant neutralized with minimal force, every piece of intelligence secured, and, most remarkably, 0 friendly casualties. The silence that followed the end of the simulation was profound and telling. Thompson emerged from his command center looking stunned and defeated, finally understanding that he hadn't just lost a training competition, he'd witnessed a demonstration of tactical capability that redefined what was possible. Sarah stepped out of her station looking energized and confident, but also somewhat confused by the intensity of the reactions she was seeing from the mysterious officers who had been observing. It was then that Sergeant Major Hayes made an announcement that explained everything that had been happening. "Lieutenant Chen," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and something that might have been awe. "Congratulations on completing your final evaluation for the Marine Corps' Special Operations Tactical Intelligence Program. What you've just demonstrated isn't standard Marine training. It's been a comprehensive assessment for one of our most classified and selective programs." The crowd of Marines who had gathered to watch what they'd thought was a simple training competition suddenly understood that they'd been witnesses to something far more significant. The mysterious officers stepped forward, and their rank insignia became visible: generals, colonels, and officials whose presence indicated involvement from the highest levels of military command. "The 5 Marines you've just faced weren't randomly selected skeptics," Hayes continued. "They're among the top performers in their respective specialties, and they volunteered to participate in this evaluation because they believed in the importance of the program we're developing. What started as a response to unprofessional comments became an opportunity to conduct the most comprehensive evaluation we've ever designed." Sarah's mind was reeling as the implications began to sink in. Her decision to leave her comfortable corporate life, the months of preparation, the struggles with self-doubt, the determination to prove herself, all of it had led to this moment that she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. The Tactical Intelligence Program is designed to identify and develop Marines who possess unique combinations of intellectual capability, tactical intuition, and leadership potential, one of the generals explained. We've been watching your performance not just today, but throughout your entire training period. Your academic background, your analytical approach to problem solving, your ability to remain calm under pressure, and most importantly, your demonstrated capacity to lead others through complex situations. All of these indicate that you possess exactly the capabilities we need. Thompson stepped forward, his earlier antagonism completely replaced by genuine respect and something that might have been admiration. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had fundamentally reassessed his assumptions. "We all did. We looked at you and saw what we expected to see instead of recognizing what was actually there. You didn't just beat us in these challenges. You showed us what real tactical excellence looks like." The other 4 Marines, Tank, Bulldog, Lightning, and Fortress, nodded their agreement, their expressions showing the kind of respect that can only be earned through demonstrated capability under the most demanding circumstances. They had begun this day believing they were superior to their opponent, but they were ending it having learned lessons about leadership, tactical thinking, and personal capability that would shape the rest of their military careers. As the crowd began to disperse and the training equipment was secured, Sarah found herself surrounded by officers eager to brief her on the program she'd unknowingly been selected for. The Tactical Intelligence Program would take her to advanced training facilities, give her access to classified operations, and ultimately place her in situations where the analytical skills she'd developed at MIT would be combined with the tactical expertise she was developing as a Marine. But in that moment, as she stood on the training ground where she'd proven herself in ways she'd never imagined possible, Sarah's thoughts went back to her father and the stories he'd told her about Marines who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. She had become part of that tradition, not despite her academic background and analytical approach, but because of it. The military was evolving, and leaders like her, who could combine intellectual sophistication with tactical expertise and inspirational leadership, represented the future of American military capability. The 5 Marines who had challenged her worthiness had ultimately become the unwitting architects of her greatest triumph. Their skepticism had created the circumstances that allowed her to demonstrate capabilities that might otherwise have gone unrecognized. In trying to prove she didn't belong, they had instead provided the platform for her to show the world exactly where she did belong, at the forefront of the most elite and sophisticated military programs the Marine Corps had to offer. As the sun set over Camp Pendleton that evening, Lieutenant Sarah Chen was no longer the uncertain computer science graduate who had struggled with self-doubt about her decision to serve. She was a proven tactical leader who had earned her place among the elite, and who was ready to take on challenges that would make today's trials seem like simple warm-up exercises. The journey from corporate executive to Marine had been completed, but the transformation from Marine to something extraordinary was just beginning.